So this session is Sibling Support, what we learned and where we're going. I believe that's the second part. I'm doing the first part. I'll be talking for about 10 minutes, and then Dr. Devries will be via Zoom. So my name is Audrey Vernick. I'm the Director of Patient and Family Advocacy for the Brain Recovery Project. I think I know most people in the room by now. My son, Bennett, is 18 now, and he had a hemispherectomy when he was 2. And he has a little brother named Sam, who's 16, not so little anymore, taller than me. So I just want to talk to you a little bit about our Sibling Initiative, which was launched last fall. And I'm just going to kind of walk you through what we've done so far so you can learn about that. So last fall, we got a call from 2 parents, Erica Hauser and Catherine Flynn, who both have, Erica has 2 daughters and Catherine has 1 daughter. I don't want to mix that up. I hope I have that right. And they asked us, what can we do for our siblings? And I think all of us that have a child with a disability and then another child or more know that it can be hard for the siblings of the child with a disability, especially with brain surgery and epilepsy. In preparing for this presentation and speaking with Dr. Devries and talking to Monica about it, epilepsy is a uniquely brutal day-to-day challenge. And there are other things that come along with epilepsy surgery that are it's challenging beyond what a typical sibling would face. So while we don't run support groups in the Brain Recovery Project, we felt like this was a really important thing to consider. And so we agreed to give it a try. And so we put out a call to interested siblings. We got about 15 replies, and about 12 were the right age, and they all were interviewed, but they all fit the bill to be part of our group. And we also determined common themes that came up among the siblings, which I'll be sharing with you. We found a group facilitator to host the meetings, and we scheduled a series of meetings for the siblings to attend. And we also had a guest speaker who was a young adult who had a hemispherectomy, a young adult whose twin brother had a hemispherectomy. She's now a 22-year-old aspiring speech pathologist. That was very, very inspiring. After her visit to our group, one parent commented, "My girls really appreciated tonight's session. Cassandra did a great job presenting and answering questions. After the call, they both mentioned that they felt a sense of relief that things are going to be okay." I'm going to cry. And which is how I felt when I read this email too. And that they're going to be okay. And it was so great to see a person just a few years older than them who gets it, is doing well, and had a great perspective on some of the real challenges that siblings of our younger kids face. And one thing I will say about this speaker, which I will be sharing the transcript on our website, but we've been a little busy with the conference, but she talked so much about the positive things about her relationship with her sibling, and I think that really resonated with the kids as well. And in August, we're going to host our last session with a SIB Shops facilitator. SIB Shops is part of a national organization, this Sibling Support Project. And they have them in every state, and you might be able to find a local one in your area. My son did SIB Shops, the sibling, when he was younger, like 8 to 10, and they were very valuable. But we're going to attempt a virtual SIB Shops, and everything's virtual now, so we'll see how that goes. And the group of 12 participants get feedback surveys after every session, and we're also getting feedback from the parents to find out what works, what doesn't work, what do we want to continue, what do we not want to continue. And so these were just some of the themes that came up, which we thought were very interesting and kind of resonated across what we've heard in our community. Things like communicating with parents. So they would say that they felt like if they needed help or had an issue to discuss, they would feel like the parent might have too much on their plate already to want to approach the parent with another concern. They had a lot of fears and worries about their sibling with epilepsy. It came up from every single sibling that was interviewed. They're just worried about what they're going through, what they continue to go through, and kind of that worry of the unknown. Life skills came up, and that related to being flexible and adapting to the unexpected, managing stress, using techniques in difficult situations. I've said, when I look at the siblings of in this community, I've said they're all rock stars because they've had to rise to the occasion, like they're superhuman. Your daughter, why am I'm such a bad time with names today? Tell me your name. No. Chantel, the conference coordinator volunteer, whose name I should remember by now. Her daughter has been Shaylee has been managing the check-in booth for 2 days, and she's 12 years old. Okay, she's 15. She's incredibly competent and amazing, and that's what we see with these kids. And they talked about how they feel like they've had to develop more kind of independent skills and take on more. They learned how to navigate judgment when going out in public with their special needs siblings. This one also came up a lot. What to do if a stranger's looking at your sibling because they're not moving the same way, or they need to be fed through a feeding tube, or there's a wheelchair. How often do you look away and ignore it? And how often do you approach the person and say, hey, this is my sibling and his name is Joe and he's super cool and he likes Pokemon. What do you like? Like, how do you bring, which thing do you do then? How to build a relationship with their sibling. Interestingly, this came up a lot too. They wanted to be closer to their sibling, but they didn't know how. So that was something that really struck us. I mean, the themes alone are enough to make you cry, right? Helping out at home. So a lot of the teens wanted to help out at home, but didn't know how. Others were like the other extreme. They were going above and beyond and like managing the household. Some parents said the siblings acted 10 years older than they were. Some things like special diets, like if the child's on a keto diet or on certain medications, what are the struggles with that? And then they also talked about like what positive things have come out of these scenarios. So that's just kind of an overview of some of the things we used all these themes to inform the sessions that we had with the teens. So the psychologist that facilitated the first few sessions was aware of the theme. She had experience with siblings and epilepsy. And then, we're using that going forward. I was supposed to show you this slide. Sorry, I'm not very good with my slides today. And then what's next? You'll see this roadmap is empty. There's nothing on it yet because we are building this initiative right now. This was a pilot project. We want everyone's input, not just people who are in the pilot project. So if you have ideas or thoughts, especially after today's session that you'd like to share, please feel free to reach out to us. And this is my contact information. And now we will transition over to Dr. Lindsey Devries in Colorado. And while they're setting up her Zoom, I am going to do a brief introduction. So Dr. Devries is a licensed psychologist and assistant professor in the Department of Pediatrics, Division of Developmental Pediatrics at the University of Colorado School of Medicine. She received her psychology BS at the university and MS at Eastern Kentucky University and completed her PhD at the University of North Dakota and a 2-year postdoctoral fellowship at JFK Partners at the University of Colorado School of Medicine. Her work focuses primarily on supporting autistic individuals and their families through evidence-based interventions and assessment. Additionally, Dr. Devries has a younger adult brother who is autistic and has intellectual disability. Her experience as a psychologist and a sibling has shaped her research and clinical interest in supporting siblings of individuals with disabilities. She is currently a board member of Rocky Mountain SIBS and serves on the Sibling Leadership Network's National Research Committee. Dr. Devries is also a certified SIB shop facilitator and has presented her work related to siblings at the local, regional, and national level. I'm really excited to have you. Welcome, Dr. Devries.
Thank you so much, Audrey, for that warm welcome. I'm so thrilled to be able to join you guys while I'm here in Colorado. Okay, so we're going to start off by talking a little bit about why siblings are important. Here are some photos of me and my brother. My brother's name is Jonathan, and he is 3 years younger than I am. And so I'm dating myself, but I'm 35. So he is 32 this year. And a couple of these photos are, just us goofing around. And I included the one of him like giving me a noogie because I think that it demonstrates that even if there's a disability in a sibling relationship, it's still your sibling. It's still your brother or your sister. And you can have fun and you can have experiences like this where there's sometimes just typical sibling stuff where you pick on each other or get on each other's nerves and things like that. But the reason why sibling relationships really are important, and the thing that I think is obvious once you think about it, is that sibling relationships are often the longest relationships that we experience in our lifetimes. And that's a little mind-blowing when you think about it. And with medical advances today, individuals with disabilities are living longer, happier lives, and oftentimes outlive their parents, who are their primary caregivers. And so siblings are often the next in line to serve in that role. And so if we're going to be thinking about family-focused interventions and supports and what is really best for the entire family, we really need to be bringing siblings into the fold and into that conversation. So I told you guys I would talk a little bit about research. Overall, a lot of parents will ask me, you know, what does the research say about outcomes for siblings that don't have a disability, but maybe have a brother or sister that does? And overall, nothing is clear cut. There's a lot of different research that uses different methodology and looks at different diagnoses, but all in all, what we know is that having a sibling with a disability doesn't necessarily mean that your overall outcomes or well-being is going to be lower than people that don't have that experience. But what we do know is that there could be increased mental health symptoms like anxiety. And when you think about some of the things that Audrey shared that have come out of their pilot project, that makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of additional worries that maybe a brother or sister might have that other kids might not. There's also this idea of being adults a little too quickly. Many siblings feel the need to grow up quickly, to take on additional responsibilities, and to pitch in ways that maybe their peers do not. But for many people, that's also a positive, because they tend to be more mature. They might have increased empathy given their experiences, and might have better coping strategies that are a little bit better developed than their peers. The other thing that Audrey had mentioned that we see in the research too is that many people say that they wish that they were closer to their sibling and that they had a closer relationship. And so that's another challenge that often comes along. You'll see throughout my slides today that I included some QR codes in case folks want to try to access those resources, certain resources directly. For people that are really interested in research, this QR code links to the Sibling Leadership Network. They have a whole compendium of sibling research and citations. That's a great place to look at specific articles and things that have been done. And so what we know about siblings of folks who experience epilepsy is that really there isn't a lot of research out there to this point. And that can be really challenging because, as Audrey mentioned, folks who have a brother or sister with epilepsy experience specific stressors or things that might not necessarily be present if you have a sibling that doesn't have epilepsy, but maybe is a wheelchair user or has autism. Some of the things that we do know from that research is that the management of seizures might be impacting siblings. There have been some studies that have shown that people who have a new diagnosis of epilepsy or their seizures are well managed have lower levels of stress and anxiety and worry than somebody who has a sibling whose seizures are not as well managed or maybe more unpredictable or more chronic, which makes a lot of sense when you think about it. We also know that if there are life-threatening conditions that come along with an individual's diagnosis, that can also increase the risk of negative outcomes. This is the quote that I pulled from one of the sibling studies about brothers and sisters who have a sibling with epilepsy. And it says, when Harry's epilepsy first started, I felt very sad and very worried about him. I hoped he wouldn't die as I didn't understand at first. I cried a lot when I went to bed, and I felt very lonely. And this was from a 10-year-old sister. And I think that while this is heart-wrenching, I think that it's also speaking to what siblings say time and time again when we look at the research and we talk to siblings about what they need from their parents and from other providers to better understand their siblings' disability and to be able to feel well supported at home. So some of those common themes that we hear is that there are complicated feelings. Siblings, like Audrey said, siblings will express feeling a lot of worry and feeling like in some ways they need to achieve for two, that they can't voice their concerns to their parents because they don't want it to be one more thing on their parents' plate. And then at the same time, there might be a lot of guilt under those feelings, feeling, angry or frustrated that your sibling is getting additional support and time and resources from your family, but then also feeling guilty for having those feelings. There's also a lot of worry about the future that siblings will bring up, what their role might be, what their siblings' health might look like, or their future living situation may look like, especially after their parents may be gone. And then there's also this sense of increased responsibility at a young age, which we've already talked about, or these concerns regarding safety. So if the brother or sister has challenging behaviors, or there are other challenges that might be present at home, sometimes those really do impact physical and emotional safety for the brother or sister. But there's also silver linings. Lots of siblings talk about celebrating the wins and how cool it is to have, seemingly small things in their life that their family can band around and celebrate together. I personally remember when my brother learned how to read. It was a huge celebration in our family because it was something that we didn't think that he necessarily would ever gain as a skill. Siblings will also say that they feel like they have a greater sense of compassion and empathy for other people. And many siblings tend to go on to be really wonderful advocates for other people, their brothers and sisters, but also for other people that may need support in advocating for their own rights or needs. I often hear about siblings that go into the helping professions. It's no surprise that I'm a psychologist around in a lot of sibling circles. And I think Audrey also mentioned a young lady who came to talk to their group who is going to be a speech pathologist. And so we need those people. And it's wonderful that people can channel their strengths and their personal experience into those professions. Siblings will also talk about how having a brother or sister with a disability has connected them with others in really meaningful ways. So talking to other siblings, getting to meet therapists, getting to meet other families, being able to meet people that otherwise would have not come into their lives. And lastly, talking about the perks. So some siblings will talk about, hey, I got pulled out as the peer model because I have a brother with autism. And so I got to get pulled out of my class to go on this field trip with the special ed class. And how great was that? I have friends who have gone on trips with their siblings for trips with their siblings that otherwise would not have happened if they weren't able to, if their sibling didn't have a disability, or being able to cut the line at Disneyland is a joke among lots of siblings as, an added perk. And so lots of siblings talk about there are positives that come along with having a brother and sister. And genuinely, many of them do want to connect with their brother and sister. But as Audrey mentioned, sometimes it's a lack of knowing how to do that. So generally speaking, some considerations for parents is thinking about the age of your child or children who don't have a disability, as well as their individualized needs. So if you have a child who doesn't have epilepsy, but is highly anxious, you might have to think carefully about how much information, what kind of information you give them about your other child's diagnosis and their medical care and some of those other pieces. It's also important to think about your goals and needs as a parent. How much support do you need from your sibling in managing your other child's care, or from that sibling in managing your other child's care? And what goal do you have for your children's relationship? That being said, there are short-term and long-term needs to consider. So if you're thinking about, how are we going to bring all of our family onto the same page and thinking about long-term care for, the day when I'm no longer here, that's a different conversation than thinking about how do I balance therapies and interventions and hospital stays with extracurricular activities or other things that our family has going on. And then it's also helpful to think about the types of support. So how much support might you get through friend networks or from faith organizations or from a mental health therapist or from something like a sib shop? And are the needs being fulfilled by those areas? Or do you need to look for additional supports that might be useful? Often families will ask me about, how do I know that a sib shop is enough versus when I need to look to a mental health professional for more mental health treatment or intervention. And generally speaking, I won't read through all of these, but when I think about the tipping point for mental health therapy and when a support group is no longer adequate, I think about over a change that's noticeable in overall functioning, an increase or uptick in mental health symptoms, or safety concerns, whether that be suicidal ideation or other risky behaviors or safety concerns for your other children. So I wanted to leave you guys with some take-home strategies, and there's lots of resources at the end of these slide decks for everyone, but it can be helpful to kind of have an idea or a plan in the back of your mind of how do we have these conversations with our kids. And so when we're thinking about young children, we first want to think about how do we build positive moments of shared enjoyment between siblings? So how can we foster some shared experience where we're both enjoying a thing? And that can be really tough at first. And so when I think about little kids, I think about things that maybe they both like to do, things that are short, and opportunities where you can together as a family do something where the disability isn't front and center. So that might be something like painting nails, or it might be watching a favorite movie, or it might be going for a walk in the park or something like that. Something that is really special and is a way that you are putting that front and center. And then also we want to balance that with individual time for the sibling that doesn't have the disability. When I was younger growing up, I had mommy-daughter days or daughter-daddy days, and those were precious to me, where we didn't have to do anything in particular that was really wild and crazy, but it was nice to have a time where conversation about my brother, his therapeutic needs, and just him, being him, and having questions and having behaviors and things like that that often took up time and energy and diverted it away from me as a child were on the back burner. And so that was really important to me. And then when we're thinking about discussing those differences, it's often helpful to think about how you are already doing that at home. So we always recommend thinking about incorporating diversity, to think about differences in dolls, books, shows, etc. Sesame Street is a great option for the really little ones. They have lots of diverse characters. We also want to think about preempting questions that your child might have, like, is my sibling's disability my fault? Is it something that's contagious? Is it something that I might catch? Are they going to die? Those might be all really big questions that your child might have. And so sharing information and talking about that can be really powerful and helpful in addressing some of those worries. So when kids get a little bit older, we want to continue to acknowledge and validate their feelings. Those messy feelings can sometimes be hard for parents to hear, that their other child might say, I really don't like my brother's disability, or I feel like I'm not getting enough attention. And as a mom or a dad, you might be feeling like, I'm giving you all that I have to give. And so it's really important to acknowledge and validate the feelings if your child is sharing them with you, because the ultimate goal is you want those conversations to continue to help support that child as they continue to grow and develop. You also want to think about opportunities for self-expression. So getting siblings involved in clubs or activities or other things that are just theirs is really important. And if that isn't going to happen because of logistics or whatever, having other opportunities where they can have an outlet. So buying them a journal, giving them a canvas and some paints, giving them a musical instrument, something where they can get out those feelings or express themselves, can be really, really important. And then we want to continue to have those discussions about individual needs. I remember having a very kind of point, it's seared into my mind from when I was a child, where I was like an animal crusader, and we had this bird's nest in our backyard that blew down when we had some really bad weather, and one of the baby birds broke its wing. And I was going to foster these birds back to health. And I remember my mom using that as an opportunity to say, you know, this one needs a lot more help, doesn't it? And I was like, yeah. And she's like, but do you love it any less than these other birds? And I was like, no, I love all my birds the same. And it spurred this conversation about how my brother needed more than I did, but our needs, and even though our needs were different, she and my father still loved us the same. And that was a really nice way of incorporating that conversation that I still remember to this day. And then there's also additional outside support. So this QR code links to where you can find SIB shops, which was already mentioned by Audrey. The ARC also has opportunities for siblings to connect. There might also be other possibilities that are nearby to wherever you live. And so Adams Camp is something that we have here in Colorado, and they do camps for individuals with disabilities where they provide ongoing therapeutic support, but they also have a sibling camp that runs in tangent too. So there might be things like that in your neck of the woods as well. And then for adolescents, these conversations are going to be deeper, and we want to think about interventions in future plans and bringing adolescents into the fold. And so we want to keep doing the things that we're doing, but we also want to think about how do they fit into future planning for your other child. And then it can also be useful to look out for resources and information that could be useful for your teen. And so these are some things that I really like. We have several teens that have come back to volunteer with younger siblings where maybe they want to be a peer leader in a SIB shop, or they want to sit on a panel and talk about their experiences at a local conference. All of those things are wonderful and can be a nice way to support teens. I will say quickly, when we're thinking about future planning, one thing that I think is not talked about enough is that siblings, we joke at Rocky Mountain Sibs that we're the club sandwich generation, meaning we have not only potentially our aging parents to care for, but we also have siblings and potentially our own children. And so that can be a lot to try and juggle and to plan out. And so it's important to start this process early and talk about it often. And so it's important to gauge what the sibling is thinking and feeling, but also how your own hopes and wishes fit with that, and how you might be able to work through if there are differences in what maybe the sibling wants versus how you envision things going. But most importantly, what does the child with the disability want? One of my good friends who sits on the Rocky Mountain Sibs board with me also has a brother with autism. And she said that she would love to be her brother's guardian and to have him live closer to her, but he has zero interest in that. And that's an important conversation to have as well, of what is what fits for all members of the family when making those plans. So I want to leave time for questions. I just want to briefly touch on some of these resources. Here, just briefly, the Epilepsy Foundation has a great resource list about books about epilepsy for children. And then Baylor also has a resource about just generally teaching about disability and how to start that conversation with kids. And then here are some specific sibling resources for siblings that have a brother or sister with special needs. This YouTube video is one that is shared through the Sibling Support Project about this awesome sib who talks about her experience of having a sister with a disability, and watching other siblings, if you're not able to get plugged in with a sib shop, or maybe you're curious about what that might be like, can be a really nice way to connect to. The Sibling Leadership Network also has some online support groups for teens and young adults. I only included the information for the Facebook group for teens, but there's also one for 20-somethings as well as adults past that. And a lot of the conversation that happens there is a lot of commiserating over some of the challenges and hurdles, and then also picking each other's brains about, well, how are you guys navigating, thinking about the future, or man, COVID has been really tough for my sibling and we're not really sure what we're going to do. Has anybody found any additional resources that can be helpful for folks with disabilities to get out and about? Things like that. And then local and statewide resources can also be a great place to look for sibling resources. So DD councils often have supports for the whole family. Academic medical centers like where I'm at the University of Colorado Anschutz Medical Campus, or other children's hospitals might also have resources for siblings too. And then here are a few books that I like. Everybody is Different is specific to autism, I will say, but a lot of these are more general in thinking about siblings and their experience of having a brother or sister with a disability. One quick tip that I will share is that I learned over the course of COVID that if you want to preview a kid's book, but you don't want to buy it before you buy it or get it from the library, you can often put it into YouTube and find people who are reading it out loud. So you can listen to it first and decide whether or not it's a great fit for your child, and then decide if you want to buy it or get it from the library. And then here are a few resources around supported decision-making if you're starting to think about future planning and maybe have an adolescent where maybe you are starting to navigate those conversations, or you're starting to wonder about it for yourself and your kiddo. And so these slides will be available afterwards, and please do use these resources because I think that they can be really helpful, and a lot of information is provided that I wish I had when I was younger. Okay, that's everything that I have in terms of slides and information.